Welcome, welcome, welcome to the first WATERtea of 2022. What better way? Yeah, the teas are back. What better way to celebrate than to look at the new collection, Gleanings, by our own Rosemary Ganley. Columns from the Peterborough Examiner 2018 to 2021, available from Yellen Dragonfly Press. And I'll say that several times so that if you can't get to her house through snowstorms, at least find your way to order it online. I want to make a special welcome to those who are new to water events. And I'd ask the rest of you to just, if everybody could just please mute your phones if you're not speaking. If you're not Rosemary or Mary Yelenick or Mary Hunt, mute your phones so that we get a good clear line here. But I want to welcome those who are new to water, especially to the tea format, which we developed due to COVID and people expressing a need for more community. In other words, they didn't want to just talk about a book, they really wanted to talk with each other. And so we took that very seriously. Every month at Water, we have a liturgy, we have a meditation, and we have a discussion of a particular topic in feminist theology, ethics, or ritual. And the meditation, the liturgy, and the book talks are quite specific, but the tea format is really a hybrid, a way to take something of common interest and concern, give it a little more personal, informal approach, and still bring the kind of rigor and commitment to social change that we embody here at Water. So I welcome you all, and I begin with an acknowledgement that we are all on Indigenous land, and think of that, the people whose land you are on. Here in Silver Spring, Maryland, we are on the traditional land of the Piscataway and Anacostan peoples. We are committed to making clear the names of these lands and the community members from these nations who reside alongside us. We acknowledge that trauma is deeply embedded in the foundation of this country and perhaps of your country as well. And we recognize the deep historical, spiritual, and personal trauma that has harmed Indigenous communities, communities of color, as well as immigrants around the world. Water programs are aimed at supporting and igniting social change. Whether in theology, ethics, or ritual, our efforts are to bring together solid intellectual data with feminist activist and spiritual commitments. And we do it as an alliance, not as individuals, but as an alliance. And what better way to do it than today look at Rosemary Ganley's book, Gleanings. And I am confident that we will glean a great deal from this session this afternoon. So here's how it's going to work. I will introduce Rosemary Ganley, who for many of you needs absolutely no introduction at all, but there's so many wonderful details about Rosemary Ganley that it's always fun to add a few. And then my friend and colleague Mary Yelenick, who is a retired attorney and now part of the Pax Christi International Delegation at the United Nations, will join me in conversation with Rosemary. We three have become what I think of as kind of pandemic pals. We were known to one another before the pandemic, but finding ourselves many times during these 2 years on the same page, in the same circles, concerned with the same issues. And our friendship, our individual friendships with one another and our kind of threesome friendship has really deepened. And I want to begin by saying how grateful I am to Mary and to Rosemary for the deepening of our friendship. And I hope that we're just one example. And I hope many of you have had the same experience with other friends, that you've deepened in friendship during the pandemic. So after Mary and I have a chance to discuss a few issues with Rosemary, we'll open the floor for all of you to engage. So please stay muted until then. And then, of course, feel free to jump in with both feet. I'm not sure if there's anybody else from the Ganley tribe that's here, but if they are, I want to thank them for sharing Rosemary with us. There was a wonderful book party for her a few weeks ago, and a number of the Ganley relatives were on, and they were really both hilarious and, of course, enormously proud and thrilled with Rosemary's work. So if there are any Ganley family members with us, welcome to you. And I want to
Mary, I see Michael Ganley.
Michael screen. Ganley. Oh, yeah, that's the crowd. You see, yeah, that's the group. They can be brutal. They're very funny. I think they must be Irish, but they can be very, very funny. I also want to make a special welcome, if she's gotten here yet, to Maria Monsef, who's a friend of Rosemary's, who was elected a Liberal member. Is Miriam with us yet? Let me see.
Yes.
Yes, great. She's was elected as a Liberal member of the House of Commons of Canada from 2015 to 2021, served as former Minister for Women and Gender Equality and Minister of Rural Economic Development. Rosemary Ganley writes very appreciatively about her in her book, and we are happy to have her with us today. We also received a lovely response from the Office of Deputy Minister of Women and Gender Equality and Youth, Gina Wilson. And many of you will remember Gina Wilson, whom we invited to be with us today. She was with us in December for the last tea, as a matter of fact. And I just want to read from the Post. Please note that Deputy Minister Wilson is regretfully unable to join today's water online conversation. She wishes you much success for today's event. So that's the word from Gina Wilson. Many of you will recall a wonderful session with her where we discussed the situation of Indigenous people in Canada. And she's, I think, feels herself welcome here. And I'm sure there are a few things going on in Canada that may be taking her attention this week. So just to say that she has sent her warm wishes. And that's a tribute to you, Rosemary Ganley.
Yeah.
So I will do a little brief intro to Rosemary, and then we will spend the rest of the time in conversation. The video of this will be available at our website, www.Water Women's Alliance, along with notes. So don't worry that you have to scribble down every comment. We will have both the audio and the notes up for you later. The last time Rosemary spoke at the WATERtea was just a year ago, Rosemary. It was March 21. And the topic was on finding your voice and then using it. And she looked at her book, Positive Community, columns from the Peterborough Examiner, 2015 to 2018. And of course, in the interim year, she has found her voice and used it once again for Gleanings. And so she picks up in Gleanings where she left off in that first volume. And I want to refer you to my extensive introduction to Rosemary on that occasion, and I will dispense with that today. It was taken from a longer work to be submitted to the Vatican for her canonization, and we're lacking only locks of her hair at this point to complete that paperwork for her canonization. But I do want to say three just brief things about her. One is that she's a feminist of deep spiritual roots and abiding commitment to global social justice. That's number one, and you can see that in her teaching and her writing and her activism. The second thing I want to say is that Rosemary and her late husband, John, spent 3 years with their 3 young sons working in Jamaica and later founding the Canadian-based development organization, Jamaican Self-Help. And she wrote a book about that too called Jamaican Journal. And I think the material in that book shows you the care with which she has long been involved in international work. And I think that's really, in my view, one of the most exciting things to highlight about Rosemary in terms of not only their work in Jamaica, but then on to Tanzania, and then of course back to Canada, where they have been, where she and John and the family have been at least located to some degree. Some of them have gone west, I know, but the family has had now a presence in Peterborough for some time. And we learned through the book about her international work, particularly, and we heard it the last time about the UN conference in Beijing in '95, and then, of course, the G7 experience in Toronto. The most important thing there was that Melinda Gates got to meet Rosemary. And the other thing was that 2 seats away from Rosemary at one of the tables for one of the meetings was I won't mention the name, but a boorish, orange-coiffed American president who, as was widely reported about the meeting, arrived late, behaved badly, and left without greeting anyone. And I only think he missed the boat. It was a rather large ship, because a brief conversation with Rosemary Ganley might have set him straight. I don't know. Hope springs eternal. But the last thing I want to say is that, as is clear in this collection, Rosemary is not only a citizen of the world, but a committed and proud citizen of the unique and exemplary city of Peterborough, Ontario. A city of 81,000 people with much social change, ecological practices, cultural and educational offerings, and just plain good people if you read the book. Rosemary chronicles it all in her weekly columns in the local newspaper, and that's what we're going to discuss now. But Peterborough has reason to be committed and proud of Rosemary Ganley as well. Word is beginning to seep out. It hasn't hit the New York Times yet, but that Trent University, an institution of higher education in that city, that has existed for the 50 odd years that Rosemary has been there, Trent University will bestow upon Rosemary Ganley an honorary doctorate in June of this year. And I wanted to announce that here so that you could congratulate her, soon to be Dr. Ganley, on this wonderful honor that will be bestowed by Trent University. Well deserved, my dear. But I just want to say, please use the title sparingly. Just imagine being at 30,000 feet. A person is giving birth and they want to know if there's a doctor on the plane. That's when you want to make sure you have not used that title in booking your ticket. It doesn't work for getting first class either. So,
Okay.
Rosemary, we're thrilled for you. And the floor is open, and Mary Jelinek will start the conversation. Thank you for being with us, everybody.
Thanks, Mary.
Thanks so much, Mary, and thank you very much for the privilege and the joy of being here today. You described our friendship very, very clearly and very well. It makes me believe in reincarnation, honestly. I think I felt an immediate connection with Rosemary, as I did with you, Mary, and actually with this entire community. It's quite a special group of people. My own mother's on this call today because she's a fan of Rosemary Ganley's as well. Another friend of mine from Colorado, Jan Killick, is on because we all really, really have learned quite a bit from you, Rosemary. The name of your book is Gleanings, things gained from different sources. But I prefer calling it Gleamings because I think your pieces sparkle. They illuminate, they enlighten, and they spark reflection. Every time I read one of your pieces, all of these things happen. So forgive me if I call them Gleanings. What was the impetus, Rosemary, for your decision to write these columns for the Peterborough Examiner?
Thanks, everybody. It's really sisterhood and brotherhood, and my son Michael is in Edmonton, a good strong feminist. The whole doctorate thing is leading to a whole lot of laughter in the family. Like the brother who says, "Oh, Rosemary, I want to discuss all my ailments with you." So I just answered him and said, "Open wide." And we are going to have a lot of laughter. And goodness, that's the sign of the spirit, isn't it? Laughter. And especially in times that are so straightening for us and harsh. And then I talked to the president. Well, first of all, one of the amusing things was that I graduated from St. Michael's College in the University of Toronto with a Bachelor of Arts with a B average. So, and the president of Trent said to me, "Oh, Rosemary, you get 5 minutes to talk to the class." And I said, "Oh, you can say a lot I said to him, in 5 minutes. And he said, "I don't want to put words in your mouth." And I said, "No, you couldn't." But he said, if you would perhaps explore the fact that we're under pressure to continue a strong liberal arts and sciences faculty. This is the age of management, right? MBAs. And so he said, I'm a philosophy major too, and I'm struggling to keep our place. So I said, that's exactly my philosophy. And I mean, in our societies in the West, what more is needed than critical thinkers? This whole Canadian debacle is the way forward is being shown by leaders from civil society. Mark Carney of the bank said, this is sedition, an effort to overthrow a legitimately elected government. The manifesto that some of these truckers arrived with in Ottawa was totally lunatic. But social media has empowered, and then other dark forces have come across into this convoy. So I think we have a dire need for humane, critical thinkers who will go public. And that's why I look to you. one question I would like to pose to you is, what will I write about next? Look, friends, I have a deadline every Sunday, 650 words. I have to do a little bit of research. And oh, by the way, for 5 years, I've been paid $50 a week. It's enough for a lunch, a coffee. And I say to the editor, but I want the local papers to survive, so I don't get too huffy. But I say to him, Kennedy, how about a raise? And he says, he said it for 5 years. Oh, Rosemary, maybe next quarter. So anyway, I think that's a little bit fun too, the fact that I earn $50.
Yeah.
But I need ideas. Oh, Mary, your question was, how did it start? It started when I was teaching high school English, and a boy, I remember his name, named Jim Bolton. He said to me, Mrs. Ganley, you're always giving us writing assignments, and we have a lot of grief about them. Do you ever do any? I thought, Jim Bolton. You never know, right, from left field, where an idea is going to come and change your life. And I don't know where he is now, but that's when I started to discipline myself to get an idea. And as you can tell from my collection, well, the editor says, Rosemary, I don't know, I never know what's coming in from you. But he said, I don't have to edit them much. Mm. So I'm looking and finding goodness in every circumstance. And locally, I just looked at what I've written about this week, this year, about the Canadian Canoe Museum, which is here, about the downtown health clinic. It's called the 360 Clinic. It's for homeless people. By the Canada Health Act, everyone has a right to health care free. And then I looked at what I had written about. Several about I believe I'm blessed to have this pulpit, which is it's in the so-called secular realm, except nothing is secular. But I can't mention, how I need to insert religious moral values without direct quotes from scripture. And I can do it, and you can do it. I've written, for example, under the heading of religious affairs, I've written about my pilgrimages to Iona, my pilgrimage to Villa St. Joseph in Coburg, the Pope's fine statement, Laudato Si. I've written critically about Catholic schools being publicly funded, and therefore they've lost their prophetic edge. I've written about women priests, and I've written about the synod, and of course about sex abuse scandals. So that's in 125 columns. Maybe 15 have a religious content, a critical thinker, but a person of faith. It's just not as difficult as one would think. Then my other theme is women, because I think that, well, what in Beijing, a Muslim feminist said, I have investigated the roots of women's oppression, and the roots are in the religions. And that's really stuck with me. So we need critically to continuously to look, and we have our voices. Look at the Catholics we have had, at the theologians. Rosemary Ruther, Elizabeth Fiorenza, Mary Daly, Maria Riley, Tina Beattie, Mary McAllister, Sheila Curran. Look at the richness. Mary Hunt, Diane New, that they are critiquing the religious roots of women's oppression and leading us forward. We're so enriched. We're so enriched that, so what my job is, popularize these great ideas. What great thinker said, if you have a really huge idea, you should be able to express it in 3 minutes. If you have a mediocre idea, well, it might take you an hour. But if you have a really big idea, summary, isn't that what we teach in high school English? Summarize. So, Mary, that's a long reply to how it got started. It got started with Jim Bolton and his challenge.
Just a couple of comments. First, you raise a question of what do you write about now?
Yes.
And one of your statements in one of your articles is that breakdown gives us a chance for breakthrough, which I think you probably have a lot to write about now because there is so much breakdown.
Yes. Yes. I believe so thoroughly in grace. It's been throughout my life. And just yesterday, I looked at a statement about the Canadian dilemma by Emily Eaton of Regina. Regina, not exactly, a center of global thinking. Maybe so. You know her, Veronica? No.
No, but I'm from Regina.
Okay, there we are. There's the perfect answer. Emily said, this is the global situation we're in that's brought us to this global crisis. Oil and gas extraction, masculinism, libertarianism, alternative health industries, homeschooling, white nationalism, white supremacy, growing inequality, climate crisis, social media, and lack of critical education. This is how I operate. Oh, I got to write that down. Where's the piece of paper? And so I will write about Emily Eaton. I'll look her up and give a little bio and say, oh, she says, we have examined all of these in silos. Now we need to link them. And we women are so good at multi-linking, multitasking, multi-thinking, different levels. Oh, I got to go and change the baby, but in the meantime, I'm going to keep thinking and so on. So I think it's a vocation for us. So that's how I'll get an idea. But that I would really like you to put in the chat, Rosemary, think about this. I can't think too long, I need help.
That's a great idea, Rosemary. I wanted to pick up on Mary's question and what you've just said too about this Emily Eaton. I wonder if she's related to Heather Eaton, another great theologian from Canada. And I was struck when I was reading your book, and I'm such a nerd. It's on page 122. But you talked about a woman by the name of Anastasia Popsui. She was the mayor of Irpin near Kiev in Ukraine. And you heard her speak at the Women Deliver meeting in 2019 in Vancouver. And I read these, I've read, the books and I read the column every week and so forth. But what I am fascinated by is your ability to pick out just the person we need to be thinking about. And so I have been thinking about Anastasia this week. I wonder how she's doing with Russian troops massed on her border. Right. And I'm reminded of how local, you remind me of how local each of these global situations is. Because I wonder if women were in if more women were in more positions of greater responsibility, wouldn't we think differently about war? I mean, I'm thinking about her today. I don't know, I've never met her, but you've at least met her or seen her. But, where is she today? And the studies that show that countries led by women, for example, New Zealand, have done so much better with COVID than the ones led by men. I mean, this is hard data. And I don't mean to be Pollyannish about this, but what about this serious strategizing, Rosemary? How can we amplify not only your voice, but our voices through these individual people that we come to know? I think you're absolutely onto something here. Mary Jelinek, do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, that's really.
Yeah, I do. And I think it's a really good observation, because a lot of what Rosemary writes about, and you made this explicit at one point, Rosemary, you said, I want to raise up the voices of people of color. I want to raise up the voices of women. And certainly with Miriam, who's on the call right now, you've always sung her praises as a politician. And it's unusual to hear someone praise a politician. You've raised up so many people who are doing such good work that it's really quite remarkable. You're very, very good at that.
Yes. Yes. I think it's a characteristic of feminism, of true feminism. We're past rivalries. The times are too dire. We need to raise up, and it comes from the little, I mean, it starts with the little girls raising up each other, but being specific about it. Mary Jelinek, you work on peace, and it seems like such a hopeless, but I just believe in endurance and stick-to-itiveness and praise. I have a difficult relationship, sort of, with my landlady, and she did some repairs on the front door yesterday, and I thought, I'm going to email her and thank her. So I do have an impulse to thank. Now, I don't know what's the origin of that. It's a great quality of having, and then you have to act on it. Oh, so did I thank the Prime Minister yesterday for taking his stand? Yes. And so that is something we can do from our homes in isolation. We can send out thanks, but being specific about a certain act.
Rosemary, one of the things you wrote about in this volume, which I was really excited to read and have read so little about, is the meeting of the Parliament of the World's Religions that you attended. And I was thinking of, and first of all, my inquiring mind, did the Dalai Lama come to your session? Rosemary finished one article by saying, my session will be complete if the Dalai Lama comes. Well, I think it was complete without him, but I have great regard, of course, for the Dalai Lama, but
yes.
I'm sure that whether he came or not was irrelevant. But the Parliament certainly was ignored in the major press.
Yes.
And my question is, how do we get people like you and your approach and what we try to do here at Water, and I know what Mary does at the UN, how do we get that to be newsy? How do we get that to be glitzy? Because all the press picks up are the things where people fight with each other. So if there'd been like a food fight at the Parliament of the World's Religions, or someone had thrown a Quran at somebody's Bible, there'd been some kind of a little sort of spiritual fisticuffs with dueling texts, that would have been a great news story. That would have made every headline. But the fact that people were trying to cooperate, trying to learn from each other, trying to work together. What goes on there in the press? You've been around the press. You were with the Catholic New Times. I mean, you've been in the press on both sides of it. And how do you see that?
Yeah, it's a development of the best people for journalism. And that Parliament of the World's Religions, it was coming to Toronto. The head office is in Salt Lake City, I think. But it genuinely does draw representation from all the world's religions. And I thought, oh gosh, and it's in Toronto this year? I'm going to go. And then I approached my good young friend, Miriam Monsef, a devout Muslim. I said, Miriam, let's propose that you and me give a session. And she's a busy cabinet minister at this point. And she said, oh, Friday at 6 o'clock, I could fly from Ottawa to Toronto. And she did, and we did. And our session drew maybe 50 or 60 people, and many were young Muslim feminists. Think of that. And I mean, we were just modeling how social change takes place over boundaries, or so-called boundaries we're no longer recognizing. And it was a highlight. Then she had to turn around and fly back to Ottawa, I think. But it's using the opportunities for what you're convinced is the way forward, and then hoping, Mary, you're right, hoping somebody will report on it.
We need to share the information. The fact that the news always features bad news just shows that it's an aberration. 90% of the people in a community are peaceful, but if someone is shot that day in the community,
Yes.
that will get on the news. We have to just make it clear that peace is the default for most people.
Yes. Yes.
War is an aberration, and that should be a slogan that we use because it's true. Because it's true.
Yes.
We shouldn't get down. We should just raise up the good, as you do all the time, Rosemary. You raise up the good.
Well, I mean, it was proven to me when we went to Kingston, Jamaica, and different voices here in Peterborough said, oh, you'll get your throat cut. You're not going to go and take your family to Kingston, Jamaica. Well, pardon me, like you, Mary, I believe in human goodness and divine goodness everywhere. And we thrived. Michael was a little boy with us at that time. Nora came to visit. My sister's on now, Nora White from Brockville. And we just proved otherwise. 3 fruitful years in Kingston, Jamaica, with a powerful effect on the rest of our life and everybody we knew.
And decades of commitment to Jamaica since then, through the project and so forth. Wonderful, wonderful. I think, Mary Ellen, unless you have a pressing question to ask, or shall we open it to our wider audience?
It's not a question, but it's a comment. I mean, one of the things, Rosemary, you raise such serious issues. You do such an exhausting analysis of social problems. You raise up people very intentionally. You're so serious, and yet you're one of the funniest people I've ever known. When I hear something now that's great, I say, well, that's a fridge magnet, which is one of your phrases. That's a fridge magnet.
Yeah.
I think the funniest thing I read in your book was, well, there were a couple actually, but you're talking about the world religions group, and you said, now it was time for some circle dancing with the Wiccans to awaken the right side of my brain. And that was just such a perfect segue to everything else you had been talking about, the seriousness, the importance of getting along with other religious backgrounds, but it's just also the fun. Yes. And it's you express, I have a book in which I put phrases I've never heard before and will never hear again. So many of the things you've written are in that book now because you express new ideas and old ideas so freshly. It's just, you have such a gift. So continue to use that gift. And I'm just very grateful to know you, to have read your readings. And I just really encourage everyone to read your books. And thank you for being with us.
Okay. Well, I remember that session. I mean, it's an open-mindedness that's a grace too, isn't it? It's infused, a grace. Oh, there's a session with maiden, woman, and crone. Oh, and there's service for becoming a crone. Oh, I think I'll take part in that. Maybe there's graces so that was that session. I mean, I do go places where it's a little loopy too. And I was inducted as a crone, so pay respects.
Yes, we do, and of course the phrase now is that 80 is the new 60. The Harvard Gazette had an article about that this week, that 80 is the new 60. So that should give us all. And the other thing that's interesting is that Bill McKibben, who's someone I know you read and admire, had a piece this week with Akaya Winwood, an op-ed called "Call It Codger Power. We're older and fighting for a better America," which could be for a better world. I wish they had been a little more expansive in that. But Bill McKibben, who's done such work on the environmental question, and Akaya Winwood, who is an advisor on some of the aging issues. And they're really pushing to get older people as in the front lines of this work. And I think many of us qualify, and you certainly are a role model for how that's done and how to do that kind of intergenerational work, which, people think, oh, well, the movements are for the young. Well, guess what? The movements are for everybody, and to push what they're calling codger power.
I like that, Mary.
Yeah, I'll make sure you get the editorial, the op-ed, but it's a good piece. Really looking at the way in which, and one of the economic questions of people who are older holding so much economic power, at least in this country, and I'm sure it's similar in others as well. Well, with that, so that Mary and I don't monopolize Rosemary Ganley's time any more than we have already, I'm going to open the floor, and you can use your reaction button on the bottom right-hand side where you can raise your hand, as I have done now, to raise mine. And if you can't find it or prefer to just put your hand up, you can do that. But if you use the button, then we can do it in some kind of order. So the floor is open, with great thanks to Rosemary Ganley for this kind of free-flowing, take a sip of your tea, Rosemary, and we'll continue. So the floor is open for those who would like to make comments, especially if you've read the book and have anything to say about the book. I'm really wanting to promote Gleanings, or Gleanings, as Mary Jelinek has so quickly dubbed it, and I think that's absolutely right. But columns from the Peterborough Examiner 2018 to 21, and you can also, if you're really insistent, you can get on the weekly mailing list so that you can read these as they come out, which I find very helpful for my own thinking, and also would remind you of what Rosemary asked. So the one little teeny thing she asked us was to put into the chat where you what you think she should be writing about, or what she should be thinking about. And Miriam Monsef recommends in the chat here that you can get the book on Amazon. So and some who have scruples about using Amazon can find it elsewhere, but it's the publication is in fact from the Yellow Dragonfly Press. So I'm sure if you look it up that way, you'll get it too. So the floor is open, and comments are welcome. And again, thrilled to have you here, all of you. Who will be first? Okay, well, the very Miriam, there she is. Hello, welcome.
Thank you so much, Mary and Rosemary and all the Marys and the non-Marys. Congratulations, Rosemary, for bringing yet another spectacular group of humans together. I'm a bit of a fan, so I went to the last launch of this book, which brought incredible people together. And Rosemary, I asked you what gives you courage to write about the tough subjects that you so eloquently and thoughtfully write about, and you said grace. And then there was a glitch in the internet connection, and then I lost the rest. And I've been thinking about it since. And today you referred to grace at least twice. You said grace is in the sense of humor. Grace, you find it in open-mindedness. Can you talk a little bit more about grace, please?
Yeah, well, it's a theological concept, and I just find there's a reality. Maybe some of these theologians right here at the Tea Party can expand on grace. It's usually surprising and strengthens you, or makes you joyful, or gives you an answer. But I think it's the surprise, because we're pretty calculating with our management by objectives and so on, and planning our day. But this just breaks in. Maybe somebody else who's had maybe some classical education about Christian idea of grace, Joyce and Veronica and Mary and Sheila, would add into that. kind of amorphous.
I don't know.
But-
There's anything in the tradition that would say it better than you have, Rosemary. I wouldn't look there. I'd look to you and to others who've have experiences of grace.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Margaret.
Yes, I love that word too, grace. Some of how it's come to be meaningful to me is in the Greek language, the word charis is at the root of the word grace, and it has a meaning of gift. So it's to be gifted, to be graced, to receive giftedness. And your charism, your grace, your giftedness would be an example, Rosemary. And then in the Latin languages, gratia, gratis, which means, again, thanksgiving or thank you. And I love that because it's like gift giving and gift receiving. That's how I understand it from the languages.
Just ask your audience.
Thanks, Margaret.
Joyce, I saw, yeah, go ahead. You're unmuted now. Go ahead. Joyce.
Oh, I would just like to add in the feminist context that the spirit is feminine. And I think we as women have a sensitivity to the spirit as we assume our own gifts. What I mean by that is that we are more sensitive to the movements of the spirit or of God in our life, and we are more inclined to listen, you know? And I see that really as we embody, if you will, the spirit in the way that we relate, especially our call to relationship and to community.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the spirit moving too.
Thank you.
Who is it that says, I just go through life saying help and thank you? Think of that in a day. I lose a lot of things as I go about hearing aids, and I acknowledge finding them. Help and thank you. It's enough in a day. Thanks, folks, for expanding this idea.
The floor is open. Thank you. Veronica Dunn would be next, and then Margaret Ellen. Veronica, then Margaret Ellen.
Thanks, Margaret Clark and Joyce Murray for your thoughts on that. I'm going to shift a little bit, but I think the importance of grace is in the experience. And one thing that I was involved with you, Rosemary, that continues to be a teaching moment for me was back in about 2001, I think, when the Pope came to Toronto. And we organized, Rosemary and I and a few other women, we organized alternate youth days. And I was amazed at how much publicity we got. We were just a small group of people, but because we were kind of, you know, an alternate story to the big story that was being told about the Pope coming, we got a lot of press. And there was a lot of conversation about that. I've never had a similar experience since. But for me, that was a moment that just how a small group of people can make a big impact if you can kind of sense the opportunity and seize the moment.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. It's often from the minority position, isn't it? You're resisting a power that hasn't been questioned before.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh, the Pope. Well, we had a lot of objections. This was John Paul, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've had a lot of objections to the last two, Benedict and John Paul.
Yeah.
Got to do better. Got to do better with one of these people present. Oh, somebody just put on the chat. It was Anne Lamott, a great American writer,
Oh, yeah.
who said the three prayers are help, thank you, and wow. We got to have wow from the arts.
Someone would also put in the chat the link to the Bill McKibben thing, so that's in there as well.
Okay.
Margaret Ellen, go right ahead. You're next.
Yes, I guess as I've listened to each and all of you, and especially yourself, Rosemary, to me, it all kind of comes down to one sentence you said a few minutes ago, engaging the opportunities. Just think that gathers it all up for me, whether they're big or little. It reminded me too of, the work of George O'Keeffe. She painted little flowers, but she made them big.
Yes.
Just that whole sense of awareness. So I'm really struck, but thank you. Thank all of you for your comments today.
It's so rich.
Rosemary, I was reminded of when you wrote one of your pieces about how you went to a conference and they wanted so much money for the program book. And you said, oh, I'm not going to pay for that. Goodness, it was $50 or something for the program book. And then they said, well, we could put you could have the app. And oh my God, that would even be worse to have the app, just to find your way. And that you really went rather randomly through the conference, finding these, or should I say, engaging the opportunities, as Margaret Ellen has put it so well. Yes. And I think you do that. And I think you're the proof that it really does work. And also you give solace to some of us who are not as techie as we'd like to be, that it's not all in the technology. So thank you for that as well. You're absolutely right about that.
Yeah, these are really serious pandemic times. And I had written quite seriously. So I thought last week, I'm just going to confess what a dunce I am with technology. And a lot of my readers are like us, our age, our life experience. And they said, oh, what a relief that was. I could really relate to that.
Yeah.
You just learned how to check out groceries, with the so I find that, at least in my life of trying to be prophetic, you need to mix it up. And like you were saying, Margaret, some humorous columns, some columns where I talk about the Olympics.
Mm-hmm. Sheila Curran in Dublin, do you want to pick up on that? Let's see where you go.
I mean, it's a great conversation, and I think, Rosemary, the challenge that you put forth about how to put it out there in a very local paper, key concepts for ordinary folk to read in a way that stimulates both hope but challenge, and whether it's religious language or non-religious language, but about a value to which the world needs, not just the locality, but in the local context, people are given a key into what that is. And I think that's a huge gift, because you do it in 600 words. Number one, which is a gift, easily knowing you were an English teacher. I was never good at English. I love the subject, I love it, but I'm not there's always, Latin America suited me because people go around and around in circles 100 times. So I come from a kind of that world, but I think it's a huge challenge. And I think the thing that you say, about where do you get the opportunity and how do you maximize that opportunity to highlight something that stimulates a conversation for the public that you write for? And I mean, that in itself is a unique gift, coming with all the other keys that you have in your head, but to make it so accessible to such a wide ranging group of people. And that is a gift. And it's in Ireland, our media, we used to have very good media, very good critical thinkers. Not necessarily people of a faith tradition in that,
No.
but good critical thinkers. And we're losing that all the time because people don't analyze and they don't back up information, because it's, rapid internet, 3 lines, well, what does that mean? And they can write on that. And there's a lack of depth creeping into both education,
Yeah.
university education, because we're following very much
Yes.
the America model now to get in as many people and, get the money and, the quality is out the door. And the other side of it is that people just want a 10-minute news bite. So I think what you've done is really key. And it is a challenge to all of us to know how to do that of an era that we're not formed in that way of doing. So I find it both every time I read your stuff a challenge, as well as looking at those opportunities in my context. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, I'm limited to the daily newspaper. Here it is. The Peterborough Examiner. And today's paper is a poor woman in an apartment that isn't being repaired. It's 16 pages. They print 10,000 hard copies, but they get thousands of hits. So we're in that age. But I think there's a thirst for our voices. And certainly the editor at my paper said, get all your friends to write in, because readers look at letters to the editor first of all. So one of my missions is with people of your quality is to encourage you to put it down and send it somewhere, like Jim Bolton told me.
Mary Jelinek, your hand is up.
Yeah, just following up with that exchange between Sheila and Rosemary, that's the whole theory of social change. I mean, people are so hungry for information. Many people have a thought and think, I better not articulate this because people are going to think I'm crazy. But then if you share that with a friend and that friend says, I've been thinking that too, you get a lot of strength. And then suddenly you go to your family Thanksgiving, you raise the issue, and there's some polarity because people are recognizing this is a dangerous idea. But once it starts getting talked about like that, the next stage is acceptance. That's just that's what happens with social change. You have to start small, but you have to raise the issues.
Thank you. Yes. Well, we're certainly trying to do that here at Water on such a range of issues, and that's the challenge. And Rosemary's right to ask, what are the things that people want to learn about, think about? Put it right in the chat. Betty, and you'd be next.
Well, thanks. I really appreciate the conversation, and it prompted me a reflection back in the early 80s when Justine Merritt got the idea to tie a ribbon around the Pentagon to remind the politicians to work for peace instead of plan for war. And she happened to be in Colorado then, and she got my sister-in-law to be the national director. And she called me to say, you're in New York. Justine is coming to New York, and you can have her for a week. I said, well, what does that mean? What does she do? And I was living in Newburgh at the time, and I belonged to the Dominican Sisters at that time of the Sick Poor. Now we're Dominicans of Hope. But anyway, she came on a bus, and I met her, and I had her stay in the building where I lived, and she told me everything she was doing. She wanted to have a workshop with the sisters there. So I put out word, and the only one that came was the president of the community and the 2 novices that I had.
Yeah.
And she said, who better to come than the president of the community? She can do the spreading of the word. And I had worked in Newburgh, and I'd worked in Harlem. And so I took her to those places, and she invited people to depict on cloth fabric what they couldn't imagine lost forever in a nuclear war. In other words, what did they love most in the planet? And we went to, like I said, Harlem and other places, and people took pillowcases and they made things. And then she was there a week. I took her to what's it called? The farm over in Blairstown, New Jersey, Miriam Tres McGillis's place. And she had a whole lot of people that came to it there. And then she was leaving and I took her to the bus and she said, now I'd like you to be the coordinator of New York State. I said, New York State, nobody can do that, especially not me. She said,
No.
dear, you'll do fine. And so I became the director of New York State. We ended up with over 1,000 ribbons from all over the place. And years ago, I was working back in Denver and I took some homeless women. I took homeless people on day trips into nature with a friend from high school who was a sister of Loretto. And I took her up to Broomfield or someplace south of Denver. And we went into this place and they had ribbons still hanging on the wall. And I looked at them and I said, my gosh, that's my mom's ribbon. And I never knew she even did one. And here it was, she had been dead for a few years, but here it was on a wall, reminding people to do what they love and appreciate those around us. And people did all kinds of things. We had to have a booth up in Albany and walk around the state capitol with all the ribbons we could gather and the people with them. And I still have pictures and albums of all the stuff we did, but
that's a great story. Well, Betty, that's a great story. And I'm sure Rosemary has some connection to it. Do you remember that experience of the ribbons, Rosemary?
I just remember the Parliament of the World's Religions. There was a bare tree down in the atrium, and you could write your hopes for peace and attach it to the tree. Yes, anything that's tactile stays with you, like that, Betty Ann, and to have it come back to bless you. It's really something.
Yeah, we did up north of Newburgh, and Amish family came, and the parents and some of the older girls, and they went home and they made several ribbons, and they had their younger siblings, because those families are large, and they had their younger brothers and sisters draw pictures of what they loved most in the world. And then the girls cut out fabric depicting the same exact design of those little kids and put it on ribbons. And then they sent it in the mail to me.
Wonderful.
I mean, it's like it captured the spirit of people, and it captured the creativity of thinking and the willing to do something about it, And
thanks for sharing that with us, Betty. And I'm going to leave the floor open for one more comment or question before we close at the top of the hour, and then we'll leave the Zoom on so people can continue to chat, of course, and you're more than welcome. But if anybody else have a comment or an insight that they'd like to share that they think might frost this lovely cake. Mary Ellen, go right ahead. A word of poetry.
I'd just like to say thank you, everyone, for bringing today together. And to add the comment, Rosemary and I have been together in the Catholic Network for Women's Equality connection for many years. And Rosemary, I've always remembered what you said to me years ago was when we were feeling frustrated at writing letters to bishops who didn't answer, you said, take it beyond, take it to the people, take it. I've always kind of imagined it as wisdom, taking it to the corners of the town and crying out. And I just appreciate your inspiration in doing that and asking us all to do the same. So thanks to everyone today, and congratulations on the book, the doctorate, and this lovely tea.
Thanks. Call me Doc.
Mary Jelinek, did you have a last comment you'd like to make or anything to add here before we close out?
Yeah, just very quickly. Rosemary, one of your wonderful statements on page 202 of your book is, during the pandemic, we've been tired and lonely. Me, I'm taking another webinar on resilience tonight. I think this has been a webinar on resilience today. So thank you, Rosemary.
Oh, Mary, what a careful reader.
Thank you, Rosemary. And the book, Gleanings or Gleamings, depending on which of the consonants you decide to use, the columns, from the Peterborough Examiner, Rosemary Ganley, is available, and not only from Amazon, but I think we've had other suggestions in the chat where we can get it as well. I want to thank Rosemary for being with us. And Rosemary, you know, with your 85th birthday coming up next month, I want to offer an early congratulations and ad multos años and all that. But as I mentioned earlier, if 80 is the new 60, then 85 is the new 65. So if you were in the US, you wouldn't even be retired yet. So don't think about it. Don't even think about it. I'm sure there's probably a novel in you someplace. There's probably a play. There are probably some short stories. But what we're getting in these columns is really so rich and so helpful. And just to let you know one more time that your work resonates way, way, way beyond Peterborough. To take nothing away from that wonderful city, but it resonates with us in many, many other parts of the world, and certainly in other parts of Canada. I can see Canadians shaking their heads vigorously here, and I think it's true that we in the South especially are deeply in your debt for the way in which you critique our situation, and now you help us to understand something of what's going on currently in Canada. So it's all of a piece, and I really thank you for that. And boy, if that's a ribbon to tie on something, I'll tie that ribbon somewhere. But we are now gracefully dismissed, and
Okay.
wishing
Thanks, Mary.
everyone well. Bye
Bye,
now.
everybody.